October 25th, 2022. Rishi Sunak became the 57th Prime Minister of the UK, making a bold promise. Previously, the UK had a 15% decline in trade intensity due to Brexit. Business investment was below the 2016 peak. The pound's value also faced a significant drop. The result? Rising import costs and high inflation, reducing GDP by 4% over 15 years. While all the ministers pointed fingers at global issues like COVID and the Ukraine war, the OBR and economists blamed only one key factor: Brexit. Surprisingly, coming in power, Rishi Sunak promised to build a strong Brexit-based economy by tactfully handling the inflation and reviving investors' confidence. Fast forward to now, Sunak's tenure has just ended.
I will shortly be seeing His Majesty the King to offer my resignation as Prime Minister.
And Britain is facing severe inflation, alongside the largest debt increase since COVID. What's more striking is that the average wage in the UK in April 2024 was actually lower than it was in February 2008, creating a significant income gap. The nation is grappling with issues like the housing and energy crises and rising cost of living, all linked to one common global problem: immigration. Many native Brits now believe immigration should be drastically reduced, sparking violent anti-immigration protests across the UK. But how do we reach here? Where exactly did we fail? This is the dark side of the United Kingdom. How we reached here. During the Industrial Revolution, Britain was a global leader in technology and trade. However, the focus shifted to war-related production during the World Wars, which significantly increased national debt. After the wars, Britain saw the rise of the welfare state and the creation of the National Health Service and the nationalization of key industries. In the 1970s, the economy shifted towards services. Thatcher's policies of deregulation and privatization led to the decline of traditional industries and increased regional disparities. By the 1990s and early 2000s, as the UK focused on finance, business services, and creative industries, heavy industrial and mining faced major job losses. The result? Major income inequality. The situation was waiting for a trigger that would expose the weaknesses in the British economic model, which always struggled to balance between the sectors. And the 2008 financial crisis just did that perfectly. When the 2020s came, all this led to an unavoidable fate: a productivity slowdown. Productivity. Currently, the UK has the 6th largest economy in the world with a GDP per capita of $51,070. But that's just an outlook. In reality, the UK's global influence has significantly declined, and its economy is more concentrated in a few industries that provide little benefit to the average citizen.
It's been tighter and tighter. So subsequently, something like the cost of living crisis that's happened, or I like to call it the cost of survival.
In addition, issues like poverty and stark regional inequality are rising uniformly. For example, people who live in Kensington and Chelsea earn 4.5 times more than those living in Nottingham. The reason? What I just mentioned: the compromised productivity. In fact, productivity is an important metric of living standards and economy. Without this, a country can only consume more goods and services. Since World War II in the UK, productivity has increased steadily until the mid-2000s. After that, the graph has been going sideways. If Britain had kept its productivity growth steady but since before the 2008 crisis, it would be 25% higher now. Not only that, the sideways economy created a big gap between British productivity and that of the US, Germany, and France. UK companies have invested 20% less than those in the US, France, and Germany, ranking Britain among the bottom 10% of OECD countries. Naturally, the British economy has lost its global power, but that's only the external affair of the country. How about the internal matter? Basically, long-term productivity growth means the ability to produce more goods and services using the same resources. It leads to higher incomes and better living standards for everyone. But this growth is only possible when there's enough investments with improved total factor productivity, TFP. which is another metric to measure how effectively capital or investment and labor force are used in production, balancing each other. To increase this TFP, better management process and greater competition are vital. Unfortunately, there are the two parameters the UK is currently struggling with, which further limits its potential for productivity growth and the improvement of living standards. But why is this happening? A significant reason is that British workers often lack necessary skills. The OECD data shows that England has one of the highest rates of low-skilled young workers among advanced economies. Believe it or not, only 32% of the UK population have higher secondary qualifications compared to the OECD average. The reason? Inefficient funding for education thanks to the program of austerity. The Brexit Effect. But to handle all these issues, the UK came up with a grand decision in 2020: Brexit. This was nothing but the departure of the UK from the European Union to gain more control over the country's laws, borders, and trade policies. The UK thought it would improve their productivity by letting the government make trade deals and rules independently. But ironically, it's been 4 years and the economic benefits that were promised never happened. On the contrary, the UK economy has shrunk by up to 4%, which is about £100 billion a year. Because Britain has missed out on much of the post-COVID recovery and global trade since the pandemic, they also had to lose EU workers, which has made massive labor shortages in areas like healthcare, hospitality, and agriculture. Naturally, this led to higher costs and more regulations. For example, cheesemaker Simon Spurrell had to sell most of his company because of losses related to Brexit.
I feel betrayed and really quite let down by a government that promised much and delivered nothing.
Now he faces high costs for veterinary certificates needed to export cheese to the EU. Even strong Brexit supporters are now starting to question their choice. 56% of the Brits now think Brexit was a huge mistake. To make matters worse, the government's struggling to provide what the country needs most right now: strong leadership and a foolproof plan. Change in leadership. The UK saw 4 prime ministers in the span of 5 years under the Conservative Party, which is unusual for any modern Western democracies. Frequent changes in leadership disrupts the vision for long-term financial planning. For example, Liz Truss's budget, which included large tax cuts and increased borrowing, caused immediate economic problems. The pound dropped to its lowest value in 37 years against the dollar, and government borrowing costs rose sharply. Poor management has also widened geographical income gaps. While many Britons see the UK as comparable to European countries like France and Germany, this view mainly reflects the wealthier segment of the population. The average UK citizen is now 20% poorer than those in Germany and France, while the poverty rate of the lower income individuals has gone down to 27%. The income gap. As a result, the gap between the rich and poor has widened more than in any other major European country. People with lower incomes lost their purchasing power. In contrast, wealthier people often invest their money in financial markets and real estate, which increases their wealth. But it doesn't necessarily lead to new businesses or jobs. Lower-income individuals struggle to afford essential services, like quality education, which further limits their chances of improving their financial situation. Additionally, taxation is nearing its highest level in over 60 years. Despite efforts to improve the situation, such as implementing a national minimum wage, issues persist due to cuts in benefits, reduced hours for low-income workers, rising living costs, and the housing crisis. Particularly the last one, the housing crisis, is perhaps the most pressing issue right now for the UK residents. The housing crisis. First of all, there aren't enough homes available in the country. As a result, the houses which are available have become too expensive. Naturally, owning a home for first-time buyers is almost impossible without a high income or financial help from parents. This challenge stems from flawed planning, insufficient funding for housing, and a misplaced focus on other economic priorities rather than residential construction. As a result, the UK consistently built fewer homes than needed for the growing population, creating an imbalance between demand and supply. For example, policies like the Right to Buy scheme from the late 1970s made homeownership easier, but it drastically reduced the amount of housing available. Since then, the population grew, but the availability of housing didn't. With fewer social homes, more people are turning to the rental market. Naturally, rents are also increasing significantly. For example, if you want to rent a house in the UK, you need to spend at least 35% of your income on rent. Many reported they're spending about half their paycheck on rent for staying in London, making it the most expensive rental city in the world.
What percentage of your salary would you say you spend on rent at the moment?
Just under half.
Most of it.
Probably just under half.
Half, more or less.
As of May 2024, the average housing prices are £302,393 in England, £216,002 in Wales, £191,435 in Scotland, and £178,499 in Northern Ireland. Now compare these to the median annual salary in the UK, which is £34,963. Though the income varies by region, with London averaging £44,370 and the Northeast at £31,200. Due to this disparity, some people live in more affordable areas and take long, hectic commutes to reach their workplace.
The bus takes about 40 minutes to Liverpool, and then from Liverpool it would take an hour or hour and 20 minutes to Manchester. But then coming home, it can take me like 3 hours to get home. So yeah, it's quite draining.
The Gini coefficient, which is a measure of inequality, further indicates a growing issue of overcrowding and a rise in homelessness in the country. It means the housing prices will increase even more, but don't expect any premium quality conditions there. Instead of quality of accommodation is often poor, with issues like dampness, mold, and infestations that compromise health and hygiene. Speaking of health, the situation is quite similar there as well. Healthcare. The National Healthcare Service, NHS, was basically set up in 1948 to provide free healthcare across the country. It's still an important part of British life, but the equality has worsened than ever, particularly in the last 20 years. Despite record-high taxes over the last decade, the NHS is struggling to keep up with demand. The number of people waiting for treatment has grown from 3 million to 7.4 million since 2014. Survival rates of major health issues like heart disease and cancer have gone down below average compared to other developed countries. For this, we can't really blame underfunding, because NHS funding has significantly increased since 2019. For example, the funding came in 2023 was 11% higher than in the previous 4 years. Additionally, the number of senior doctors and nurses has also increased. But the NHS faces rising costs due to an aging population, expensive medical technologies, and higher drug prices. Additionally, staff are demanding wage increases, which further complicates efforts to improve services. And it's not only the NHS. The energy distribution is also at stake, mainly due to increased demand after the pandemic and Ukraine war. The energy crisis. The cost of crude oil and natural gas are skyrocketing right now. But who really bears these costs? Businesses and consumers like you and me. Last winter, UK households faced energy bills averaging around £2,500, a significant increase from £1,000 in 2022. This clearly shows the urgent need for the country to prioritize net zero emissions by investing in zero carbon solutions such as solar panels and heat pumps. Since August 2023, the collapse of 7 energy companies has impacted nearly 1.5 million customers. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has warned of potential further collapses, which could increase energy bills by an additional £400 annually. The reason? The shutdown of 2 fertilizer plants of CF Industries, disrupting 60% of the UK's carbon dioxide supply and causing tenfold price hikes for soft drink manufacturers. Gas shortages may also lead to product shortages in supermarkets, further straining the supply chain. To worsen the matter, BP is closing some petrol stations due to a shortage of truck drivers. Over 1/3 of households, nearly 9 million, now spend more than 10% of their income on energy, while the previous year it was only 5 million households. Due to extreme financial strain, many people are turning to food banks for help. The food crisis. But the food market in the UK is already in a bad state because of overproduction and poor distribution. The supply network is also under pressure from a shortage of truck drivers and global supply chain problems. The pandemic has pushed many drivers to seek other jobs. The number of drivers from the EU has decreased as well. But due to Brexit, the UK has zero access to them. Naturally, you'll see many supermarket shelves empty now. But demand for materials like timber is rising, driving up prices. As a result, families are struggling more than ever, facing empty fridges and children going without breakfast. This cost of living crisis affects regions unequally, with inflation hitting lower income areas harder, especially for basic necessities like energy and food. Inflation for those with the lowest incomes is nearing 11%, while the wealthiest faced only 8.5%. For example, a single parent with 3 children relying solely on universal credit may receive just over £1,000 a month. However, that amount is quickly consumed by rising gas and electricity prices. Recent statistics show that over 7 million people without basic needs in December, and about 1 in 7 UK adults had trouble with bills and credit repayments in January 2024. You might say that it's lower than the record of January 2023, but it's still higher than the record of February 2020 before the pandemic. Naturally, the rising food cost is putting more pressure on an already tight budget.
I've had a really tight budget anyway prior to sort of COVID, I suppose, really. It's been tighter and tighter. So subsequently, something like the cost of living crisis that's happened.
You can do a simple math here. Suppose one family's monthly budget is £1,254, but after covering travel expenses and direct debts, they're left with only £200 per week. After paying for gas and electricity, about £150 remains for food.
We've been here for 34 years. And have you ever seen things as bad for your customers? Never. In all the years that we've been here, we've never seen it this bad.
Now, without food banks, how would these families put meals on their table in the long term? A common factor behind all these crises is immigration, which is also a shared issue among other crisis-struck economies like Canada and Australia. Immigration. To give you an idea of how bad the situation is, Peterborough has a foreign-born population over 25%, while in England and Wales, it's nearly 17%. If we speak about London, the 2011 census showed that only 44.9% of London residents were white British, and by the 2021 census, this number dropped to 36.8%. Because since Brexit, net migration in the UK has increased sharply, reaching a peak of 764,000 in 2022. Just look at this graph. It indicates that the UK's immigration rate is maintaining an all-time high, particularly among working professionals. Public dissatisfaction with the government's immigration policies reached its peak since before the EU referendum, with 69% of people expressing discontent. According to a survey by Ipsos and British Future, which was conducted with 3,000 adults in Britain from February 17th to the 28th, 2024, shows that dissatisfaction has been steadily increasing since 2020. The reasons? The government's not doing enough to stop channel crossings, and rising concerns about high immigration numbers in the country. Among conservative supporters, 72% wanted to reduce immigration, while most Labour supporters preferred to keep it stable. In fact, the recent election saw that trust in immigration policies was low for the Conservatives, compared to Labour, with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak facing the highest level of distrust. It clearly shows why Sunak had to step down. Research shows that immigration mainly has negative effects on lower educated groups. In a 2022 study, it revealed that immigration lowered wages for the lowest paid workers by roughly half a penny each year. In response to these dynamics, the UK Labour government has recently enacted a new immigration plan that will affect everyone, especially those on work visas. For example, the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, cancelled all the previous asylum strategy the UK made. Under the Illegal Migration Act 2023, the illegal UK immigrants won't have their asylum claims reviewed. Rather, it'll be seen as an invasion of our lands. However, this did not lessen the anger UK natives felt toward the immigrants, who were just waiting for a trigger to burst out. And that came on July 29th, 2024. The nation was shaken by the gruesome murder of 3 British girls and a knife attack at the Taylor Swift-themed dance workshop in Southport. The suspect, 17-year-old Axel Ruda Cubana, was born in Britain to Rwandan parents. But rumors about his immigrant background fueled anti-immigration and anti-Muslim protests that turned into violent clashes with looting and attacks on ethnic minorities. Kuda Kumbana has also been falsely labeled as a radical Islamist migrant, with public figures like Tommy Robinson accused of spreading these misleading claims. Starmer announced that violent protesters who are targeting Muslim communities would face serious legal consequences, with hundreds already arrested. However, this move has sparked more public discontent, as many believe the government secretly supports migrants only. Naturally, protests spread from Southport to other areas in the UK, targeting mosques and migrant accommodations with far-right sentiments. The UK government is still investigating foreign influence in spreading disinformation and urged social media companies to take action against it. However, the agitation is still growing each day, and it seems the UK government is still struggling to find any convincing ideas to solve this. Which leaves us with questions like, can Starmer truly save the country in the end, or is the doomsday for the British economy approaching? Only time will tell. Subscribe for more economics and finance analysis.